A Los Angeles producer survives a harrowing brush with death.
When the fire department assessed her, she thought she had had a stroke.
Last thing I remember is waking up on the grass.
But when police find a dead body in her garage, the case takes an unexpected turn.
She was laying on her side with a dead dog behind her.
As they search for the truth, detectives unravel a tightly wound mystery.
I observed 2 trash cans. There were notes that were attached to the trash cans.
The notes talk about what you're going to find. You're going to find 2 females. This is what you're supposed to do with the bodies.
Possibly we had 2 sisters, each of whom wanted to die.
The investigation reveals evidence of a more sinister plot.
There was no indication whatsoever that she wanted to end her life.
So was this a tragedy or an expertly crafted murder?
Did she accidentally survive, or did she produce this scene and plan to survive the whole time?
I kept telling the detective that there's no way that she did this.
I get where you're seeing this from. All I can say is, I'm the best person I know.
It's March 2015 in Studio City, California, an LA suburb that's home to some of the world's best-known TV and film lots. This quiet enclave of LA is disrupted midday when 911 hears from a concerned woman who just received a strange call from a friend.
The Los Angeles Police Department received the 911 call from Tracy.
She's concerned about a friend of hers who lives in Studio City. She may have had a stroke. She doesn't know what's going on, but she's spoken to the woman in peril, and paramedics need to get to that address.
The fire department arrived and they went through the front door. And when they went to the front door, they found Jill Blackstone in a back bedroom.
The woman, Jill Blackstone, is conscious but disoriented.
She had stated she had crawled from the front yard to her bedroom. When the fire department assessed her, I believe her speech was a little slurred and she was talking slowly. Tracy said she thought she had had a stroke, but they did not find any evidence of a stroke. She really didn't give a clear explanation as to why. She didn't call 911 herself.
Though the woman's condition is not as dire as originally feared, those on scene sense that she is not alone.
One of the paramedics notices that there's lots of dog bowls and lots of dog toys, food bowls, and so he inquires. She tells them that they have 3 dogs. Those dogs may be in the garage with her younger sister, Wendy Blackstone.
One paramedic stays with Jill Blackstone as the other paramedic walks over to a detached garage. It's completely dark. His eyes start to burn. He knows by just his experience that the burning of his eyes is probably some form of gas or something burnt inside the actual garage.
So he opens the main garage door.
The light reveals a tragic scene.
He observed Wendy Blackstone to be laying on her side. He went and checked for vitals and found that she was deceased.
As responders take in the scene, they discover charcoal smoldering in a grill and the 3 family dogs.
One dog was dead next to Wendy Blackstone's body. 2 dogs were still in movement. See a dog deceased and dead like that and next to a body, and seeing the way that Wendy Blackstone was, I think it was very difficult to see that.
Detectives are called to the scene as first responders tend to Jill and the surviving dogs.
Tracy had gotten there right when they were taking Jill Blackstone out on a gurney to the ambulance. We didn't interview Jill at that time. Animal reg came out and took those dogs to a hospital.
One of the dogs had sort of arc-shaped burns on his nose that were consistent with him trying to knock over the Weber grill, and it was knocked over.
As detectives assess the scene for any signs that could have led to their deaths, they identify some troubling notes.
I remember entering the garage, seeing Wendy on the ground and dog next to her. The barbecue still on, and a big culprit could be carbon monoxide. And then we see these notes.
In front of a detached garage, there were notes that were attached to the trash cans.
The notes talk about what you're going to find inside the garage. You're going to find 2 females that do not want to be resuscitated. This is what you're supposed to do with the bodies. This is what you're supposed to do with the dogs.
Seems like they wanted to both commit suicide, but someone's alive and someone's now dead. When you go to a scene like this, you're trying to interpret exactly what happened.
Wendy Blackstone was born on August 2nd, 1965 in Bayonne, New Jersey.
There were 3 sisters. There was Wendy, Lisa, and Jill. And Jill was the oldest, then Lisa, and then Wendy was the baby.
In her early teenage years, Wendy found herself having trouble with the basics of life.
Wendy did mention having problems at her bat mitzvah. She mentioned it was very dark and she was very uncomfortable at the celebration. That may have been like the clue that got things rolling. Wendy was diagnosed by the same doctor as I was. Wendy had something called Usher syndrome, which combines retinitis pigmentosa with hearing loss.
Retina pigmentosa is a degenerative eye disease that continues to degenerate all the way through life to the point where a person will become blind.
I had the idea that possibly we could make a site for RP and Usher people to be email pen pals. I met Wendy online in the 90s. We mostly didn't talk about vision problems. We talked about life. Wendy was a nice person who did her best with what was handed to her. Very kind person.
Wendy was determined not to be a do-nothing person. She went to a private school, and then she also went to college and got her degree.
Jill looked out for Wendy. Wendy was the baby sister, and Jill was there pretty much every step of the way, helping her.
Wendy worked after college while living at home, before eventually receiving Social Security payments when her vision and hearing declined.
Meanwhile, older sister Jill had gotten her master's degree in communications, got a job as an executive assistant at a TV station, and really built quite the career for herself.
She comes out to Los Angeles and she's doing reality shows. She got a job at Jerry Springer, and several years later, she became an executive producer for Divorce Court.
At one point, we produced the same talk show just at different times. So we both produced the Sally Jesse Raphael show. Jill, I think, had the reputation of having high expectations. She was successful.
At one point in my career, I was managing editor and senior correspondent for a TV show called Crime Watch Daily. I remember one day, Jill came in and sitting right next to me. This was a daily, news magazine show where you had to pound out scripts.
She was making a lot of money, and she had the big house in the Hollywood Hills, plenty of bedrooms for the whole family when they come out. Everything was great.
When we were producing talk shows together, Wendy would visit Jill in LA. So she'd fly from New Jersey to LA on her own.
Wendy would visit Jill in California frequently, and she liked it. It was bright and sunny and warm.
Jill took it upon herself to say, hey, Wendy, come live with me.
Jill has no kids, and she's single. For Wendy, this was paradise. It was great. And Jill thought, well, why not? Come stay here. I've got plenty of space. And that's what Wendy did.
Wendy, she had friends in LA. Wendy was trying to have a more independent life.
I think that Wendy found that she preferred to be in Los Angeles, where she had friends her own age. And it was very fun to be with Jill. She was Jill's biggest supporter.
Wendy and Jill started an animal rescue together and settled into life on the West Coast.
Wendy was a partner with the Thumping Tales with Jill, and they would rescue dogs. Wendy was very proud of Jill and the work she was doing, and she was very happy to be part of the sort of the team.
But now the sisterhood is broken in half when Wendy is found dead in the garage at their home. Detectives continue to analyze the apparent suicide notes left behind by the sisters.
The notes were left in front of the garage on the trash cans.
And there are 2 notes on the trash can. It sounded like a suicide note. One is, enter carefully. The other one, it says, do not resuscitate.
When it came to the situation at hand, we figured that maybe they both wanted to commit suicide and they wanted their dogs to go with them. And somehow Jill Blackstone survived.
It looked like it could have been a double suicide, but only Jill Blackstone knows exactly what happened that night in that garage.
Coming up, Jill tells her story.
She can't do anything without me.
But in the hands of a seasoned producer, the mystery deepens.
Wendy is consuming my life. I didn't know what else to do.
After what looks like a failed dual suicide attempt, leaving Wendy Blackstone dead in the garage, but her sister Jill alive, Jill is taken to the hospital to be treated for carbon monoxide poisoning.
Tracy, who had contacted 911, was there. A police officer had reported that he had overheard Tracy ask her, "Did you do this on purpose?" And Jill responded, "No." That was a weird statement to me. By no means did Tracy go inside the actual perimeter of the house. So that was important for us to talk to her to find out why she asked that question and exactly what it meant.
Thinking Tracy will have additional insight, investigators bring her to the station to give a formal statement.
When asked about why she had stated to Jill, "Did you do this on purpose?" she stated that Jill was now getting tired of taking care of her sister and was hoping that her sister could go back and stay with her family on the East Coast and Jill could proceed on with her life. That didn't happen. So she thought possibly that Jill had done something.
Troubled by this statement, police ask Tracy for more information about her relationship with the Blackstone sisters.
She was a veterinarian for the dogs that Jill had notes that were attached to the trash cans said to please call the veterinarian Tracy to take care of their dogs.
They were very, very good friends, to the point where when this incident occurred, the first person Jill calls is Tracy, not the fire department or anything like that.
When she had awakened outside in the front of the house in the sun and had called her friend to come and help her.
Police learned there was one key detail Tracy left out of her initial 911 call.
She said it was just silent when she was talking to Jill and said, where's Wendy and where are the dogs? And Jill had stated to her, well, I think they're dead in the garage. Now, that wasn't stated to 911 at the time, and it wasn't until we interviewed Tracy that she had advised us of that. I would think that would be something that you would tell 911.
It was suspicious, but then at the same time, I think she was also trying to evaluate how coherent and how well Jill was at that time, because she, in my opinion, Tracy wasn't 100% sure that Jill was in the right state of mind herself. But those are flags to me that she thought that her friend Jill was capable of doing something.
We wanted to know from Tracy what the dynamic was between these two sisters. Was there any type of issues when it came to threats or anything? And we didn't find that from Tracy. She just simply said that it was very difficult for Jill to take care of her sister. She specified their ages. You know, we're older now. Jill wants to have a life. We asked her, do you believe that Jill could kill Wendy? And she said no. She didn't believe she could, or the dogs. So we had to go from there and then go to the location and actually go and see what was there before we could go any further with it.
Detectives returned to the Blackstone residence, where CSI has discovered additional notes left around the home.
Everything around the house had sticky notes to it, every piece of property, everything in when it came to Wendy's room, laptops, phones, medication, and who to give it to and what to do with it. So an indicator that obviously Jill Blackstone and Wendy Blackstone were not going to be there to be able to tell somebody what to do.
On Jill's desk was this binder that said last will and testament for Jill and Wendy. And there were keys to her cars and passwords to her computers and a little neon pink, one of those little mini Post-it notes that had, in Jill's handwriting, that had a really interesting phrase on it that I always thought was very curious that said, Wendy is loved, know that.
I found that to be very suspicious in regards to why anybody would write that down about Wendy.
Detectives on scene zero in not just on what was written in the notes, but also who it was that wrote them.
The first thing that struck me with the do not resuscitate letter that was next to Wendy's body was that it wasn't signed by both Jill Blackstone and Wendy Blackstone. I didn't find anything that had any signature by Wendy Blackstone that had stated that she wanted to commit suicide in any way. That sticky note of no, Wendy was loved had the same handwriting that I found throughout all the Post-it notes.
It appeared everything was done by Jill. And what do we have? We have Wendy dead, Jill alive. And Jill is saying, Wendy wants this too.
Having at first viewed this as a failed suicide pact, police are now beginning to see things in a very different light.
Based on the evidence that I had seen, a potential murder-suicide, and the fact that her best friend's asking her, did you do this on purpose? Those are flags to me. We needed to have a conversation with Jill. Jill had all the answers.
After processing the crime scene, the next day in the morning, we went to go talk with and see if Jill Blackstone would be interviewed. She was at the hospital being taken care of for carbon monoxide poisoning, and we had her on a suicide watch to make sure that nothing would happen to her.
We engaged in a friendly conversation. She was answering questions in regards to her life, the fact that she worked for the Springer show.
Oh, yes.
Springer, very tip.
Oh, did you? He's still going.
He's still the best guy in the world.
She was just talking about her career. It's impossible not to realize that she's smiling and happy, delighted to reminisce about it.
When's the first time that you found out about your sister, that you knew that she died?
I have a very hazy memory of somebody saying, as I was getting into the ambulance, Wendy is dead. I'm trying to stay pressure-free because I'm in a little bit of shock.
For someone that had just gone through this event, who had lost a sister, I would have suspected to see someone that was more on the grieving side.
When detectives start to ask about what happened to Wendy, Jill quickly goes on the defensive.
Do you know why I talked to you about what happened?
I imagine because there was death at the home. A little bit of history might help you. Wendy is disabled. She can't do anything without me. She can't drive. She can't go anywhere. She's socially isolated. She can't work.
Jill really made it seem like Wendy was completely dependent on her.
The last few years, it's gotten profoundly worse. I've lived with so I'm tired a lot. I'm taking more Xanax than I should be. Wendy is consuming my life. I was just tired of taking care of her.
She appeared to just be tired of her, and she didn't want her in her life anymore.
The day after finding Wendy Blackstone dead, police interview her sister Jill from her hospital bed. Jill details she has housed and cared for Wendy for over a decade.
Jill really tried to give Wendy a nice life. I think it started to get burdensome for her. It seems like maybe Jill was sort of responsible for her.
Jill explains that on March 13th, the night before Wendy was found dead, the two held a celebration for her sister's beloved dog, Ollie, who had died the previous year.
Wendy's favorite dog of all the many dogs they'd had was a dog named Ollie. And so they would celebrate him from time to time.
We had fire and we made burgers. And we ate burgers for a while. And, we talked.
Jill said that it was getting chilly out that night, and they transitioned into the garage.
Inside the garage, she says she burned charcoal not just in a newly purchased grill, but also in a large metal trash can.
Just making it seem like a really nice sister event, celebrating the life of a dog that Wendy loved.
And I said, we have marshmallows. And she said, oh, those mint marshmallows? And I said, yeah. She said, that will be good.
Jill said she was running inside to go get marshmallows in the kitchen. But then Jill tells officers that she passed out.
So that's the last thing you remember?
Last thing I remember is waking up on the grass.
She claims that she fell on her way into the house and then didn't remember anything till she woke up with the heat of the sun on her face.
She painted that picture of this horrific accident.
Jill begins to struggle answering detectives' more pointed questions.
Well, at that point, that's when I asked her about these notes. Wait, what about these notes at the scene? And then she goes on and says, those notes were placed there days before because I was really struggling and I was just trying to obtain the courage to possibly do this murder-suicide plot. But she couldn't get herself to do it.
I just got my courage up and I stuck them up one day. Over the weekend, maybe. I thought if I saw them, I would have courage.
So you're the one that actually pulled the barbecue and the tin garbage can inside the garage. You said you closed the garage door and the garage door was closed.
Maybe I did. And maybe I really did that. I don't remember that.
This was taped on your trash can in front of the garage. And says both parties have do not resuscitate orders.
Yeah, I didn't know what else to do.
When asked if Wendy ever wrote anything or said anything about committing suicide with Jill or wanting to be killed in any way, she said, oh, no, absolutely not. She never wanted any of that.
And just try to help us explain. That's all that we're asking.
Well, part of it is that the obvious answer is that carbon monoxide poisoning.
Uh-huh.
Part of it is maybe part of it just snapped. I don't know. I don't know what that feels like to snap.
And then having this carbon monoxide brought that out, I think.
I can tell you, I've never snapped in my life. People think I'm the strongest person in the world.
The notes and complaints you're talking about in the beginning of how difficult it is to be with Wendy. Wendy had no idea of this murder-suicide pact. So to now transform it into, we were just having a really nice party and it was a horrible accident. That isn't consistent.
My partner advised her that she was going to be arrested for the murder of her sister, Wendy Blackstone, and the situation with the dogs, the abuse, and that we were going to present it to the district attorney. And after that, we pretty much knew there was going to be more to do.
But as the interview wraps up, Jill continues to maintain innocence.
I get where you're seeing this from. All I can say is, I'm the best person I know. I devoted my life to saving animals and saving people. I'm a good person. I devoted my life to helping Wendy. And I would never want to break her harm.
Following a troubling conversation with police, Jill Blackstone leaves the hospital in their custody.
We arrested her based on the probable cause and the articulable facts that we found at the time that we believe that she murdered her sister. That is something that we do on a felony if we believe that someone has committed that crime.
2 days later, detectives present their case against the successful producer to the district attorney, suggesting Jill may have used her knowledge as a TV producer to try to obscure her true intentions.
Some of the types of shows that she produced were crime shows. So I think she managed to throw a fair amount of darkness on the situation. I do think that the initial appearance of the case, with the suicide notes and the deteriorating health of both parties, probably made it seem that a jury might not convict.
The district attorney's office said, we like the case, but we just need a little more information in regards to the autopsy, some more forensic work.
With no charges filed, Jill is released while investigators continue to bolster their case. At Wendy's autopsy, other than the effects of Usher's syndrome on her sight and hearing, the medical examiner finds no signs of ill health.
She was a 48-year-old woman in exceptionally good physical shape who worked out 45 minutes a day on a treadmill. She was slender, athletic, no disease evident, no health issues.
The presence of Xanax with the carbon monoxide was her cause of death. I had spoken to her internist that had taken care of her over a 4-year period, and he had stated to me that he had never prescribed Xanax for Wendy Blackstone in any way. He was shocked to find out that she had Xanax in her system and stated, I can testify to you that I have never heard her talk about being depressed or have any mental issues. We only knew of one person in the household that had Xanax, and that was Jill Blackstone.
With circumstantial evidence against Jill piling up, police talk to the sisters' parents, hoping they can explain this baffling situation.
We wanted to see exactly what the dynamics were with the family. They wanted to be helpful with the investigation initially.
We are talking about a family that's in tragedy right now with this. We've got one sister that had been arrested and one sister that's now dead. When we advised the family of what had happened and what we believe to be intent on Jill wanting to kill Wendy, they absolutely did not believe any of that. They believed it was an accident. We left it at that time because there was still more to do on the case.
With the story of what exactly happened in the garage still shrouded in mystery, Jill remains free. Next, police turn to Wendy's friends.
We email basically once a week. I was waiting for a reply, and it was late, but that wasn't completely unusual. I went online and went on Facebook to her Facebook page, and there people had posted condolences, and that's how I knew. I didn't even fully believe it at the time that something had happened, and so I contacted Detective Jones of LAPD and spoke to her.
John tells detectives what life was like for Wendy in Jill's home.
Jill's description of Wendy as being kind of an invalid who was completely reliant upon Jill, it was upsetting when that wasn't the case at all. Wendy could take care of herself. When I had heard that there was some evidence Wendy had tried to kill herself, I kept telling the detective that there's no way that she did this. Wendy was not a negative person. She didn't like to dwell upon the bad things. She was mostly a positive, forward-looking person.
John is not the only one to tell police that Wendy was not suicidal.
We went and spoke with approximately 5 or 6 of Wendy's friends. We found that she was a very capable woman.
Her friends here in Los Angeles, they always found her very upbeat, supportive. She was always looking to the future. Even though her future maybe wouldn't look so bright to most people, she always found something positive to focus on, which I think is admirable.
There was no indication whatsoever that Wendy wanted to end her life.
Coming up, detectives push for evidence that will land Jill behind bars.
The FBI got things out of that computer that we never could access, and they were extremely valuable.
And learn the details of a disturbing previous encounter.
She felt like she was drugged, and she said something was in that cookie.
It's been 6 days since Wendy Blackstone was found dead in the garage of the home she shared with her sister, Jill Blackstone. After conversations with the sisters, friends, and family, detectives review Wendy's personal emails.
We found an email with one of Wendy's friends that was a couple weeks before Wendy had died.
The email reveals damning insight that Jill may have been planning Wendy's death for a while.
Wendy is telling her friend in this email that, oh, you know, Jill and I had this black and white cookie and Jill cut it in half and I took a bite into it and it tasted terrible.
Wendy had told her friends she went to bed that night and she couldn't get up. She felt like she was drugged. And she said something was in that cookie. And Jill said, oh, well, maybe when I cut the cookie in the kitchen, maybe some of the tramadol, which is a narcotic for dogs, maybe some of the tramadol got on the cookie.
What we think happened is Jill was doing a trial run of a potential narcotic to see what the effect would be on her.
In March 2016, the FBI assists with an extensive data search on Jill's laptop.
The FBI could do a great deal more. The FBI told them up front this is going to take 6 months, and it did, at least 6 months. But they got things out of that computer that we never could access, and they were extremely valuable.
What was discovered forensically on her computer was, in her search engine, 3 different topics: suicide by gun, carbon monoxide, poisoning. All searches done, which leads to premeditation. This just adds more evidence of something that she was planning, which is what we needed.
As the evidence mounts, police also look at Jill's financial records to find a motive for killing the sister she spent years caring for.
In the years before Wendy died, Jill's life went from active and doing all kinds of stuff to, she got sick with lupus, so she couldn't work as much.
She was very disturbed by having this disease that didn't enable her to continue earning as much as she had earned, and she had to downsize. And I think it may have bothered her much more than it did her sister.
When detectives receive Wendy's financial records, it locks in the final piece of evidence.
Jill had filed bankruptcy several years before this incident. Wendy did get disability payments, and Wendy saved her money. Wendy had loaned her $100,000 from her life savings.
But the situation hadn't improved.
Jill was about $1.4 million in debt. This included various loans, credit card bills, veterinary bills. So if you add up this horrible financial picture, plus the burden of Wendy is too much, murder-suicide may have actually crossed her mind.
In the days after Wendy's death, the DA's office decided not to press charges.
Every time I went to the district attorney and submitted what I felt would be more or enough to have them file a charge against Jill Blackstone, there was always something else that they asked for.
Now, after 3 years of gathering additional forensic evidence, detectives present their strengthened case to a new deputy DA, Gretchen Ford.
For the earlier prosecutors, they found those suicide notes persuasive, and they thought that possibly we had 2 sisters, each of whom wanted to die. I did not think that. She'd researched this mechanism of death, and she had purchased the instrumentality 24 hours in advance, and that's more than enough for premeditation and deliberation. And then really lied about the facts surrounding the death and certain other factors. All just made me very confident that this was a first-degree murder. But I think that everybody was trying to figure out how this case would look to a jury.
With a DA now on board and ready to prosecute, in March 2018, Detective Janine Jones heads to New Jersey with a warrant to arrest Jill Blackstone.
We knew that she was in the area in New Jersey by her parents' house. And we knew that by just following her on Instagram. I was able to talk to her parents, and they stated they had not seen her since April. The parents basically told us that they have a lawyer and didn't want to speak anymore.
But Jill's lawyer gets word that detectives are looking for her and calls to give them her location.
She's in Baltimore, where she's being treated for migraines. And once that treatment is over, Jill Blackstone finds herself wearing handcuffs, and she is subsequently extradited back to Los Angeles, where she faces that murder charge and those animal cruelty charges.
Indicted for the murder of her sister, Jill Blackstone never faces trial.
So when I talked with prosecutor, police officers, and they were creating the plea deal, I think there was some thought given to the family that they'd already lost one daughter. Now were they going to lose another daughter?
She pled no contest to voluntary manslaughter and the 3 counts of animal cruelty.
Jill Blackstone is telling the world, I'm not saying that I did it, I'm not saying that I didn't do it, but I will take the punishment to fit the crime.
At sentencing, the judge considers the wishes of Jill and Wendy's parents, who have lost one daughter and are facing the imprisonment of another.
The family's stance was that she should be given as little time in custody as possible, and that they would take care of her, and that they needed her back.
In the end, Jill is sentenced to 8 years in prison.
With this case, I think absolutely that justice prevailed, that Jill Blackstone was held accountable, and Jill Blackstone will continue to live this for the rest of her life.
At no point did I see any remorse from Jill. She convinced herself that this was an accident when she knew very well, this was not an accident. This is exactly the result that Jill wanted.
The mystery is, did Jill Blackstone accidentally survive, or did she produce this scene and plan to survive the whole time?
She was struggling. I think Jill snapped because, in her view, there was no way out. The last thing that could be done for her sister and herself was to take her life and possibly take her own life.
This idea of Jill being the caretaker who, was nobly sacrificed her life to take care of Wendy, when that's clearly not the case. Just because she has a disability doesn't mean she's less of a person. Wendy should be remembered as very gracious. She was a really nice person.
California, 1998. The kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, where the nights are quiet enough to hear your own thoughts, where nothing ever happens until it does. And when it does, it doesn't arrive with warning. It doesn't knock. It slips in, silent, precise, and leaves behind something far worse than chaos. It leaves behind questions. The car is the first thing they notice. Parked at an odd angle near the end of a residential street. Not abandoned enough to raise immediate alarm, but not right either. The driver's door slightly ajar. Keys still in the ignition. No signs of panic. No shattered glass.
No struggle.
Just a stillness that doesn't belong. A neighbor calls it in. Minutes later, patrol cars arrive. Flashing lights cut through the calm like a blade. Officers approach cautiously, scanning, expecting something, anything, but finding nothing. No body. No driver.
No explanation.
Just absence. And absence in cases like this is never empty. It's loud. It echoes. The name comes soon after. A young woman, 26, local, known in the community. The kind of person whose life leaves a clear trail. Work, home, friends, routine. Predictable, safe. Until suddenly not. She was last seen the night before.
No distress.
No signs of fear. No indication that anything was about to break. She had plans. She had a life waiting for her the next day. But she never arrives. Her house sits just a few blocks away. When officers step inside, they expect disorder. Panic leaves marks. Violence leaves evidence. But this place is wrong in a different way. Everything is intact. Too intact. A glass sits on the kitchen counter, half full. A light left on in the hallway. Shoes placed neatly near the door. It looks like someone stepped out for a moment and never came back. No forced entry.
No overturned furniture.
No sign of struggle. Which means one thing. Whoever was here didn't need to force their way in. They were let in. Or they were already inside. The silence inside that house becomes heavier with every passing second. Detectives walk slowly, eyes scanning every detail, every surface, every shadow. Because when there's no obvious evidence, the smallest detail becomes everything. And yet nothing speaks. Outside, the neighborhood shifts. Word spreads faster than facts ever could. She's missing. They found her car. No one saw anything. Curtains twitch. Phones buzz. Conversations drop into hushed tones. Fear moves quietly, settling into places it was never invited. Because this wasn't supposed to happen here. But it did. And now, it's everyone's problem. The timeline begins to tighten. Detectives reconstruct her last known movements with precision. Every call, every stop, every interaction. They build it piece by piece, hoping something doesn't fit. Something always doesn't fit.
But not this time.
Everything aligns until it doesn't. Because the timeline ends abruptly. There's no transition, no warning, just a clean break where reality stops making sense. Which means something interrupted it. Something deliberate. Investigators shift focus.
Who knew her routine?
Who knew where she would be? Who could approach her without raising suspicion? Names begin to surface.
Friends.
Co-workers. Casual acquaintances. People who had crossed her path in ordinary ways. Each one questioned. Each one examined. Most answers come easy. Too easy. Because innocence is usually uncomplicated. But guilt hides.
And it waits.
The car becomes the center of attention. It doesn't belong where it was found. Not logically. Not geographically. It feels placed, positioned, like a detail meant to be noticed. But why there? Why not hidden? Why not destroyed? Unless it wasn't about hiding. Unless it was about control. Days pass. Search teams comb through nearby areas. Fields, roadsides, drainage ditches, empty lots. Nothing.
No clothing. No personal belongings. No trace.
It's as if she vanished between one moment and the next, leaving the world intact but removing herself from it completely. That kind of disappearance doesn't happen by accident. It's designed. And that realization changes everything. Weeks turn into months. Leads grow thinner. Witness memories blur. Small inconsistencies fade into uncertainty. The urgency begins to slip, replaced by something colder. Frustration. Detectives revisit the same questions, the same people, the same evidence, hoping repetition will crack something open. But the case holds.
Tightly.
Refusing to give anything back. Then, quietly, almost reluctantly, a new detail emerges. A witness. Not immediate, not confident, but enough to matter. A vehicle was seen. Different from hers. Parked nearby. Engine running. Lights off. Late at night. Too late. The description is vague. A common model, a color that blends in. Nothing unique, nothing that screams attention. But it introduces something new. She wasn't alone. Now the investigation pivots outward. Registrations are checked. Hundreds of vehicles match the description. Too many to narrow down quickly. Still, detectives begin the process. Door by door, question by question. Most people cooperate. Some hesitate. A few don't like being asked. But one name comes back more than once. Not suspicious on the surface. Not alarming. Just present. connected in small, almost forgettable ways. He knew her. Not closely, but enough. Enough to recognize routines. Enough to blend in. Enough to be overlooked. When questioned, he doesn't resist. He doesn't panic. He answers everything.
Calm.
Controlled. Measured. Too measured. His timeline is clean, supported, verified. He places himself somewhere else at the time she disappeared. And it checks out. Which should be the end of it. But something doesn't sit right. It's not what he says. It's how easily he says it.
No hesitación. No confusión. No gaps.
As if the answers were ready before the questions were asked. Investigators push harder. Repeat questions. Shift angles. Apply pressure. Nothing breaks. No physical evidence ties him to her. No witness places him at the scene. No forensic link.
And without that,
there's no case. Time begins to do what it always does. It moves forward. Relentless. Indifferent. The investigation slows. Resources shift. New cases demand attention. The file doesn't close, but it fades.
Cooling. Quietly.
Becoming something else. A cold case. Years pass. The neighborhood changes. Families move. Houses are repainted. New routines replace old ones. The street where her car was found looks normal again. But it isn't. Because memory lingers.
People still talk about it. Carefully.
Softly. They don't like the details. Because there aren't enough. No body.
No weapon. No answers.
Just a void that never filled. Inside evidence storage, the case is reduced to boxes, reports, photographs, collected fragments of a story that never finished itself. Dust settles. Technology evolves. Methods improve. But the case stays frozen in 1998. Until something shifts. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just a decision. To look again. Evidence is pulled from storage. Items once examined under older limitations are now seen differently. Techniques that didn't exist before are now standard. And among those items, something small. Something overlooked. Not because it wasn't important, but because at the time it couldn't speak. Now it can. DNA. Extracted carefully, preserved through years of silence, waiting for a moment when science could finally hear it. That moment has arrived. Lab technicians work slowly.
Precisely.
Because cold cases don't offer second chances. Contamination, error, misinterpretation, any of it could bury the truth again. Samples are processed. Profiles begin to form. Incomplete at first. Then sharper. Clearer. Until finally, a match begins to emerge. Not random. Not distant.
Familiar.
A name surfaces. And when it does, it hits with weight. Because it's not new. It's not unexpected. It's the same name. The one that never quite left the edges of the investigation. The one that had answers too ready. The one that walked away. Years ago. Untouched. Uncharged.
Free.
Not because he was innocent, but because the evidence wasn't ready.
Until now.
And now, after years of silence, it's speaking. Loud enough to reopen everything. Loud enough to shatter the past. Loud enough to turn a cold case into something alive again. Because the truth was never gone. It was just waiting. Waiting for the moment when it could finally be heard. The moment the DNA result stabilizes on the screen, the room doesn't erupt. There is no sudden celebration, no raised voices, no cinematic rush of victory. Instead, there is silence. Heavy, calculated. The kind of silence that only exists when something long buried finally starts breathing again. Because everyone in that lab understands exactly what this means. Not a theory. Not a suspicion. Not a possibility. A direction. And in a case that has lived in uncertainty for years, direction is everything. The name attached to the emerging profile isn't unfamiliar. It never was. It sat quietly inside old reports, buried in interview transcripts, mentioned in passing notes that never quite justified escalation. A name that investigators had circled once, maybe twice, then let go. Not because it didn't matter, but because they couldn't prove that it did. Now that changes. The evidence is still fragile, partial, not enough for an arrest. Not yet. But it's stronger than anything they've ever had before. Strong enough to reopen the case formally. Strong enough to bring people back into rooms they thought they had left behind forever. Detectives who worked the original case are older now. Some retired. Some moved on. But when the call comes, they remember immediately. Cases like this don't fade. They don't disappear. They stay, quietly, somewhere in the back of the mind, waiting for a reason to return. And now, they have one. Boxes are reopened. Files spread across tables. Photographs that once felt static now seem different, charged with something new. Every detail is re-examined, not as history, but as something active, something unfinished. The timeline is rebuilt. Again. But this time, with sharper tools. The suspect, because now he is one again, has changed over the years. Life moved forward for him. Job. Relationships. Routine. On the surface, nothing extraordinary. The kind of life that doesn't attract attention. Which is exactly what makes it unsettling. Because ordinary people don't just exist inside unsolved disappearances. Unless they were never truly ordinary. Surveillance begins quietly. Carefully. No sudden moves. No visible pressure. If he's involved, they don't want to spook him. Not now. Not when they're this close to something real. Detectives watch patterns. When he leaves. Where he goes. Who he meets. Every movement documented. Every interaction noted. Because behavior tells stories that words try to hide. And over time, small inconsistencies begin to surface. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. But enough. Enough to suggest that the man they're watching is more controlled than average. More aware. More cautious. The kind of cautious that doesn't come from personality alone but from experience. From knowing what it feels like to be questioned. From knowing how close something once came. They bring him in again. Years later. Same room. Different weight. He recognizes it immediately. The tension is subtle, but undeniable. He sits the same way. Speaks the same way. Calm. Measured. Almost rehearsed. But time has changed one thing he can't fully control. Confidence. Because back then, there was nothing tying him directly to the crime. Now there is something. They don't reveal it immediately. Instead, they let him talk. Let him rebuild his version of the past. The same alibi. The same timeline. The same carefully structured distance between himself and the moment she disappeared. He sticks to it. Perfectly. But perfection can be dangerous. Because it doesn't leave room for reality. And reality always shifts. Investigators begin to introduce small deviations. Minor details adjusted. Questions reframed. They're not looking for a confession, not yet. They're looking for cracks. And eventually they find one. A hesitation. Brief. Almost invisible. But it's there. A question about that night. A detail about timing. Something that should have been easy to answer, but isn't. He recovers quickly. Too quickly. But it's enough. Because now they know. The story isn't as solid as it once seemed. Outside the interrogation room, the case builds momentum. The DNA is processed further, compared against additional samples, expanded using newer techniques that didn't exist in the late 90s. What once looked like fragments now begins to form a clearer picture. A connection. Not accidental. Not secondary. Direct. And with that, the investigation crosses a line it hasn't reached before. From possibility to probability. They return to the physical evidence. Items collected from a house, from the car, from places that once seemed irrelevant, reanalyzed under modern scrutiny, enhanced, refined. And slowly, piece by piece, the silence begins to break. Fibers. Skin cells. Trace contact. Things too small to notice back then now speak loudly. And they all point in the same direction. Toward him. The man who once walked away. The man who blended into the background. The man who had answers ready before questions were even asked. The pressure increases.
Surveillance tightens.
Interviews expand. People from his past are contacted again. Friends. Co-workers. Anyone who might remember something, anything, that didn't seem important at the time. And memory under pressure starts to shift. A comment he made once. A place he went unexpectedly. A behavior that felt slightly off, but not enough to question. Back then. Now, everything matters. Because context changes meaning. And suddenly, small details don't feel small anymore. They feel connected. The timeline adjusts. Not dramatically. But enough. Enough to place him closer. Closer than he ever admitted. Closer than he ever allowed. And that's when the weight of it begins to settle. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. This was planned. Controlled. Executed with precision. Which explains the lack of evidence. The clean scene. The silence. Because whoever did this understood something critical. How to disappear someone without leaving themselves behind. Or, at least, how to try. Investigators begin preparing for the next step.
Carefully.
Methodically. Because one mistake now could undo everything. Years of waiting. Years of silence. Years of missed opportunity. They need more. More certainty. More proof. Something undeniable. Because this case has already survived too long without answers. It won't survive another failure. And then something unexpected surfaces. Not from the suspect. Not from the original evidence. But from a completely separate database. A genetic connection. Partial. But strong. A relative. Close enough to matter. And suddenly, the investigation expands beyond him. Into his family. Into his history. Into places he thought were untouched. Because DNA doesn't lie. It doesn't forget. It doesn't fade with time. It waits. And when it connects, it reveals more than just identity. It reveals truth. Investigators move quickly now. Quietly, but with urgency. Warrants are prepared. Samples are collected, comparisons are made, and the results tighten the circle. What was once distant is now closing in. What was once uncertain is now aligning. And for the first time in years, the case feels different. Not cold, not stalled, but alive. Dangerously close to resolution. But there's still one problem. He hasn't confessed.
And without that,
There's always doubt. So they bring him in again. This time, the tone changes. No more open-ended questions. No more casual conversation. Now it's direct. Focused. Relentless. They lay out pieces. Not everything. Just enough. Enough to shift the balance. Enough to make him understand that the past is no longer behind him. That it's here. In the room. Waiting. He listens. Quiet.
still. Processing.
For the first time, the control slips. Not completely. But enough. Because now he knows. They're closer than ever before. And the truth is no longer buried. It's rising. Slowly. Inevitably. And there's nothing he can do to stop it. The room tightens the moment the door clicks shut behind him. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a soft, controlled sound that seems to seal something in place. The air feels heavier now. Less space to move. Less room to think. And he knows it. Because this isn't like before. Back then, he walked into a room like this with nothing to lose. No evidence tying him down. No weight behind the questions. Just suspicion, thin and fragile, easy to step around. He answered, he left, and the world kept moving. But now, the world has circled back. And it's waiting for him. Detectives don't rush. They don't raise their voices. They don't need to. The pressure in the room does the work for them. Quiet, persistent, suffocating in a way that isn't visible but impossible to ignore. He sits the same way as before, shoulders steady, hands controlled, eyes moving just enough to take in the room without appearing restless. But there's something different now. A delay. Not in his movements. In his certainty. They begin with the familiar, his name, his history, the connection, however small, to the woman who vanished. He answers smoothly, the same tone, the same calm delivery, a performance refined over time. But performances have limits. And the detectives know exactly where to press. They don't start with the DNA.
Not yet.
Instead, they rebuild the past in front of him.
Slowly, piece by piece.
The timeline, the locations, the moments that once seemed ordinary but now feel loaded with meaning. They mention the car. Parked at the end of the street. Doors slightly open.
Keys inside.
They watch his face. Nothing. Not even a flicker. Then they shift. A witness. A car that didn't belong. Engine running. Lights off.
Late.
Too late. There's a pause this time.
Small.
But real. He answers, but the rhythm changes. Just enough to notice. Just enough to matter. The detectives don't acknowledge it. They move forward, as if nothing has changed, because pressure works best when it feels unintentional. They introduce distance. Years. Time passed. Life continued. And then they close that distance instantly. DNA. The word lands differently. It doesn't echo. It sinks. He doesn't react immediately, not outwardly, but something shifts beneath the surface. A calculation. Fast. Silent. Searching for options that no longer exist. They don't give him time. They explain just enough. Modern techniques. Reanalysis. Evidence that once meant nothing now meaning everything. They don't overstate it.
They don't need to.
Because the truth is already doing the damage. He leans back slightly. Breath controlled. Eyes steady. But now there's something else.
Wait.
The kind that wasn't there before. Because this isn't a question anymore. It's a narrowing path. They begin to connect the pieces. Fibers. Skin cells. Trace contact. Each one small on its own. Together, undeniable. They don't accuse. They present. And that's what makes it harder to fight. Because accusations can be denied. But evidence just exists. He listens.
Silent. Processing.
The room stretches. Seconds feel longer. Words hang in the air, refusing to disappear. And for the first time since he sat down, he doesn't respond immediately. The gap is noticeable. And it's everything. They press gently. Ask him to explain. Not aggressively. Not confrontational. Just a request. Simple.
Direct.
And suddenly, simplicity becomes the hardest thing in the world. He starts to speak.
Stops.
Adjusts. Begins again. The story is still there. The same structure. The same distance from the event. But now, it doesn't fit as cleanly. Because the edges have changed. The timeline isn't as stable. The certainty isn't as sharp. And every adjustment he makes to hold it together creates another point of weakness. The detectives let him talk. Let him build. Let him struggle. Because the more he explains, the more he reveals. Not in what he says, but in how he says it. The control is slipping. Slowly. Almost imperceptibly. But enough. They shift again. Not back to the evidence. Forward. To motive. Not directly. Not explicitly. But through implication.
Through questions about his life at the time.
Stress. Frustration. Interactions. Moments that may have meant more than they seemed. He resists. Dismisses.
Deflects.
But the effort is visible now. Because maintaining control requires energy. And he's using more of it with every passing minute. Outside the room, the case is accelerating. Teams are working in parallel. Warrants executed. Additional samples processed. Data cross-referenced. The picture is no longer forming, it's closing. Inside, the focus remains on one thing. Breaking the silence. They return to the night. The last known moment. They ask him to walk through it again. Step by step. Slowly.
Carefully.
Because repetition reveals truth. Or exposes lies. He complies. But this time, the details shift.
Slightly.
A time changes. A location adjusts. Small enough to seem insignificant. Large enough to matter. The detectives notice. They don't interrupt. They let him finish. Then they go back. Ask again. Same question. Different wording. And the answer changes again. Just a little. But enough. Now the cracks aren't subtle anymore. They're visible. He feels it. His posture tightens. His responses shorten. The confidence that wants to find him is fading, replaced by something harder to manage. Pressure. Real pressure. Not suspicion. Not theory. But something tangible. Something closing in. They place a photo on the table. The car. Exactly as it was found.
Still. Silent.
Unanswered. They let it sit between them. A physical reminder. A fixed point in a story that refuses to move. Then they speak. Not loudly. Not forcefully. But with clarity. They tell him they know he was there. Not as a question. Not as an accusation. As a statement. And statements are harder to escape. He doesn't respond immediately. Seconds pass. Then longer. The silence stretches until it becomes unbearable. Because now there's nowhere to hide. No distance left. No version of the story that fully protects him. And he knows it. His eyes drop briefly. Just for a moment. But it's enough. Because that moment says more than any answer ever could. They press again. Not harder. Just closer. Ask him why. Not what happened.
Why?
Because motive is human. And humans break when confronted with their own reasons. He shakes his head.
Quietly.
Almost automatically. But the denial lacks force. Lacks conviction. Because something inside him is shifting. Something that has been held in place for years is beginning to move. And once it moves, it doesn't stop. They don't rush it. They wait. Let the silence work. Let the wait settle. Because this is the moment. The edge. The point where everything either collapses or locks back into place forever. His breathing changes.
Subtle.
But different. His hands, once steady, now shift slightly against the table. A small movement. But it breaks the image. The control. The illusion. And that's when they know. He's close. Closer than he's ever been. They lean in. Just enough. And ask one final question. Simple.
Direct.
Unavoidable. What happened that night? The room holds its breath. He doesn't answer. Not immediately. But this time, the silence feels different. Not empty. Not resistant. But full. Heavy with something unspoken. Something waiting. And for the first time in years, it feels like the truth is right there. On the edge of breaking through. Ready. Or about to disappear forever. The silence doesn't break all at once. It fractures. A breath held too long. A shift in posture that can't be undone. The kind of small human failure that doesn't look like much until you realize everything is built on it. He exhales.
Slow.
Controlled. But not enough. Because control is no longer absolute. The question still hangs in the air. What happened that night? Simple words.
No accusation.
No escape route. Just a straight line leading to a place he has spent years avoiding. He looks at the table. Not at the detectives. Not at the photo. Just the surface in front of him, as if the answer might be written there somewhere, waiting to be found. Seconds pass. Then more. Long enough for doubt to creep in. Long enough for the moment to teeter on the edge of collapse. And then
He speaks.
not clearly. Not directly. Just a fragment. I didn't mean. The sentence dies before it forms. But it's enough. Because meaning doesn't need full words. Not here. Not now. The detectives don't react visibly. No sudden movement.
No interruption.
They let it exist. Let it expand. Because once something escapes, it's harder to contain. They stay quiet. And silence, once again, does the work. He shifts again. Hands clasping, unclasping. Eyes moving without focus. The structure he held onto for years is weakening, piece by piece. I didn't go there for that, he says. More words now. Still incomplete. Still defensive. But no longer distant. Now he's inside the moment. And that changes everything. The detectives lean in just slightly, not to intimidate, to anchor, to keep him from drifting back into denial. Then why did you go? One of them asks.
Calm,
Neutral.
but direct.
He hesitates. Because motive is dangerous. Motive opens doors that can't be closed. It was just a conversation, he says. But even as he speaks, the weakness is obvious. Because conversations don't end like this. Conversations don't leave cars abandoned and people missing. Conversations don't create decades of silence. They don't challenge him immediately. They let him continue. Because the more he talks, the further he moves from control. I just wanted to talk, he repeats, quieter now. The words sound hollow. Even to him. The detectives slide another photo across the table. Not the car this time. The house. Still, intact, frozen in time. A life interrupted. They don't explain it. They don't need to. He looks at it. Really looks. And something changes. Because this isn't abstract anymore. It's not a memory he can reshape. It's real. Fixed.
Permanent.
And it's pulling him back. You are inside, one detective says. Not a question. A fact. He doesn't deny it. Not immediately. And that delay is everything. He swallows.
Nods slightly.
Barely visible. But undeniable. I went in, he admits. The first clear step. The first line crossed. And once that line is crossed, there's no returning to the other side. The room feels different now. Not lighter. Heavier. Because truth, even partial truth, has weight. What happened inside, they ask. Again simple. Again direct. He leans forward, elbows on the table, hands pressed together as if holding something in place. It wasn't supposed to, he starts.
Stops.
Starts again. It got out of control. There it is. The shift. From distance to involvement. From denial to explanation. But explanations are fragile. They fall apart under pressure. What got out of control? The detective asks. He closes his eyes briefly. Just for a second. As if seeing it again. Or trying not to. We argued, he says. The word lands flat. Insufficient. Because arguments don't erase people. Arguments don't create cold cases. The detectives know it. He knows it. But it's where he starts. She said things, he continues.
Vague.
Deflecting. Blame shifting. A familiar pattern. But the tone is different now. Less certain. More reactive. And then they press. He shakes his head. Slowly. As if the next part is heavier. As if saying it will make it real in a way it hasn't been before. I didn't plan it, he says. A common phrase. Almost automatic. But in this room, it doesn't protect him. It exposes him. Because planning isn't the question anymore. Action is. What did you do? They ask. No room to move now. No space to redirect. Just the center of it all. He breathes in. Holds it. Lets it go. And then, I pushed her. The words come out low. Flat. But they change everything. Because now there is contact. Now there is physicality. Now there is a moment where something irreversible begins. The detectives don't react. They don't need to. They let it settle. Let him feel it. Because once a person says something like that out loud, they hear it differently. They understand it differently. And they can't take it back. She fell, he adds quickly. Too quickly. As if trying to soften it. As if trying to reduce what just happened to something smaller. Something accidental. But the room doesn't accept that. The evidence doesn't accept that. The years of silence don't accept that. And then what? The detective asks. Still calm. Still steady. But closer now. Closer to the truth than anyone has ever been. He doesn't answer immediately. Because this is the part. The point where everything becomes irreversible. Not just what happened. But what he did after. Because actions after the moment. Those are choices. And choices define everything. His hands tighten. Knuckles pale. He stares at the table again. But there's nothing there to help him. No version of the story that protects him. No path back to distance. Just forward. I panicked, he says. The word is expected. Almost inevitable. But panic doesn't explain what comes next. And then they push. He exhales sharply. I checked, she wasn't moving. The room goes still. Even quieter than before. Because now the implication is clear. No need for confirmation. No need for explanation. The direction is set. And then the detective asks again. Relentless. Because stopping here isn't enough. Not after all these years. Not after everything. He hesitates longer this time. Because what comes next isn't panic. It's decision. And decision carries intent. I didn't know what to do, he says. But the hesitation betrays him. Because he did know. Eventually. Everyone does. You moved her, the detective states. Not a guess. Not a theory. A conclusion. He closes his eyes again. Longer this time. And when he opens them, there's no denial left. Just exhaustion. A quiet surrender to something that has been waiting for years. Yes. One word. But it collapses everything. The case. The mystery. The silence. All of it begins to fall into place. But it's not over. Because moving her is only part of the story. There's still the question that has haunted this case from the beginning.
Where?
Where did she go? Where has she been all these years? And the detectives know it. They lean forward. Closer than before. Because now, they're not chasing a ghost. They're sitting across from the answer. Where did you take her? The question lands heavier than any before it. Because this is the final barrier. The last piece. The one that transforms a confession into closure. He doesn't respond immediately. Of course he doesn't. Because this is the hardest part. The place he buried deeper than anything else. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. For years. Decades.
But now.
There's nowhere left to hide it. The silence stretches.
Long.
Tense. Unforgiving. And then, he looks up. For the first time.
Directly at them.
And in that look, there's something new. Not control. Not resistance. But something closer to release. As if holding it in has become heavier than letting it out. His lips part.
A breath.
A pause. And just as the answer begins to form, the moment hangs. Suspended. On the edge of everything. Because what he says next will finally end the silence. Or deepen it forever. The room holds still as his breath settles into something slower, heavier, as if every inhale now carries weight he can't push away. His eyes don't drop this time. They stay forward fixed, as though he understands there is no benefit in looking anywhere else. No corner of the room will give him distance. No silence will give him time. He's out of time. Where did you take her? The question doesn't repeat. It doesn't need to. It sits there, unchanged, waiting for something real. He presses his lips together. The hesitation isn't about memory. It's about consequence. Because once he says it, the place becomes real again, not just in his mind, but in the world. A location. A point on a map. A place investigators can reach. A place that has been hidden for years. He exhales. There's a road. He begins, voice low, uneven. Outside the city. Not used much. The detectives don't interrupt. They let him build it. Dirt road. Off the main highway. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking. He swallows. I drove there. The simplicity of it makes it worse. No drama.
No hesitation.
Just movement. Just a decision. The detectives exchange a brief glance, then refocus. One of them reaches for a notepad, not because they need it, but because writing it down makes it tangible. Keep going. He nods, almost reluctantly, as if each word pulls something heavier out with it. It was late. No cars.
No lights.
Just empty. The word hangs. Empty. Like the space he created. I stopped near a clearing. He closes his eyes again, but this time it's not to avoid, it's to remember. There were trees.
Thick.
You couldn't see the road from inside. A perfect place. Too perfect. He opens his eyes. I carried her. The phrase lands hard. Because now the distance between them, between what happened and what was done after, disappears completely. This wasn't panic anymore. This was action. Calculated. Deliberate. The detectives don't react. Not outwardly. But the shift in the room is undeniable. Where exactly? One of them asks. He shakes his head slightly. I don't know coordinates. I knew the area. That's enough. It always is. Because places like that don't change much. Not in ways that matter. What did you do then? The detective presses. He leans back slightly, as if the memory pushes him physically. I dug. A single word. Simple. Brutal. The room absorbs it. Because digging means preparation. Even if he claims there was none.
How long? They ask.
I don't know. A while. Time blurs in moments like that. Or maybe it doesn't, and he just doesn't want to say. And then he hesitates. Not because he doesn't remember. Because he remembers too clearly. I put her there.
No detail.
No description. But enough. Enough for the truth to take shape. The detectives let the silence sit again, but this time it's different. This isn't the silence of uncertainty. This is the silence of confirmation. Years of questions. Condensed into a few sentences. But they're not done. Because a confession without verification is just words. And this case has lived too long on words alone. You covered her? One detective asks. He nods. Yes. With what?
Dirt. Leaves.
Whatever was there.
Aschalo grave.
Unmarked. Forgotten by everyone except him.
Until now.
The detective writes quickly now. Not just notes, directions. Landmarks. Anything that can guide a search team back to that place. You've been back, they ask. The question lands sharper than the others. He shakes his head immediately.
No.
Too fast. Too certain. The detectives notice. But they don't challenge it yet. Because it doesn't matter. Not right now. What matters is the location. The confirmation. The path forward. Outside the room, everything accelerates. Teams are mobilized. Maps are pulled. Satellite images reviewed. Old routes compared to current terrain. The area he described begins to narrow. A search team is assembled within hours. Because time, after all these years, suddenly matters again. Back inside, the questioning continues, but the tone shifts. Less resistance. More extraction. They're not trying to break him anymore. They already have. Now they're building. Why there? One detective asks. He shrugs slightly. It was quiet. The answer feels small. Insufficient. But it reveals something important. He didn't choose it randomly. He chose it because it allowed him to disappear something. Because he believed no one would look. Because he believed time would erase it. In some ways, he was right. Years passed. Nothing was found. The case cooled. Life moved on. Except it didn't. Because evidence doesn't disappear. It waits. And now, it's led them back. He sits quieter now, shoulders lower. The tension that once defined him has drained into something else. Not relief. Something closer to exhaustion. As if holding the truth inside for so long has taken more from him than saying it ever could. But the detectives aren't finished. Because one question still lingers. The one that sits behind everything else. Why didn't you come forward, they ask. Not aggressive. Not accusing. Just direct. He looks down again. For a long moment, he doesn't answer. When he does, it's barely above a whisper. I thought I could just move on. The honesty is raw. Unfiltered. and completely insufficient. Because no one moves on from something like this. They just pretend to. Until they can't anymore. The detectives don't respond to that. They don't need to. Because the truth has already dismantled whatever illusion he built. Hours later, the search team reaches the area. The road is still there. Faded. Less used. But exactly as he described. They follow it. Slowly.
Carefully.
Because places like this hold more than just evidence.
They hold time.
And time in a case like this is fragile. The clearing appears almost exactly where he said it would. Trees dense enough to block the road. Ground uneven. Undisturbed, at least on the surface. But surface doesn't matter. Not anymore. They begin to search. Grid by grid. Methodical.
Precise.
Because after all these years, there is no room for error. Minutes pass. Then longer. The forest stays quiet. Unchanged. As if nothing ever happened there. As if it never held anything at all. Until a signal.
Subtle.
But unmistakable. The ground isn't consistent. A disturbance.
Old.
But present. They mark it. Clear the area. Begin to dig. Slowly.
Carefully.
Because this isn't just recovery. This is confirmation. This is the moment where years of absence turn into something real. Something visible. Something undeniable. Back in the interrogation room, he sits alone now. The questions have paused. But the weight hasn't. He knows what's happening. He knows where they are. He knows what they're about to find. And, for the first time, there is no distance left between him and what he did.
No denial.
No control. No version of the past that protects him. Just reality.
Closing in.
And somewhere, miles away, beneath layers of dirt and time, the truth is being uncovered.
Piece by piece.
Bone by bone. Waiting to finally be seen. Waiting to finally be heard. After all these years, the silence is ending. The first fragment doesn't look like much. Not at a glance. A pale shape against dark soil.
Small.
Almost unremarkable. Something that could be mistaken for stone, for debris, for anything but what it actually is. But the moment the brush clears the surface, everything stops. Because everyone on that site knows. This is it. No one speaks.
No one needs to.
The silence that settles over the clearing is heavier than anything that came before. Years of searching, years of not knowing, years of absence. All of it condenses into a single point in the ground. They've found her. The excavation slows immediately. Every movement becomes deliberate, measured, careful in a way that borders on reverence. This is no longer a search. This is a recovery. Gloves tighten, tools shift. The soil is removed layer by layer, each inch revealing more of what had been hidden for decades. Time has done what time always does. It has altered, degraded, softened, but it hasn't erased. It never does. Fragments become structure. Structure becomes form. And with every passing minute, the reality becomes harder to separate from the image in everyone's mind. This is no longer a missing person. This is a body. A life interrupted. A story that never finished. And now, finally, it's speaking again. Forensic teams document everything. Angles.
Depth.
Position. Because even now, after all these years, the ground holds answers. Not just about where she was placed, but how. How she was left. How much time was taken. How much care or lack of it was involved. Details that don't just confirm what happened. They reveal intent. Back at the station, the update arrives quietly.
No annoncement.
No dramatic delivery. Just a message.
Found.
The word is simple, but it carries everything. Detectives read it, and for a moment no one moves. Because this is the moment they've been working toward, not just in the last few days, but for years. The moment where uncertainty ends. Where absence becomes presence. Where a cold case becomes something real again. Inside the interrogation room, he doesn't see the message. But he feels it. There's a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. The kind of shift that comes when something unresolved finally clicks into place. He looks up. Not at anyone in particular. Just up. As if something just changed. And it has. Because now, there's no question left about what happened after that night. Now there's proof. The door opens. A detective steps inside. Not rushed. Not tense.
Calm.
Controlled. But different. They sit down across from him. And for a moment, they say nothing. Because silence at this point is louder than anything else. Then, we found her. The words land without force. But they don't need it. Because impact doesn't come from volume. It comes from truth. He freezes. Just for a second. But it's enough. Because that second contains everything he's been avoiding. Everything he buried. Everything he thought would stay hidden. It's gone now. Unearthed. Exposed.
Real.
His shoulders drop slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough to show something has shifted inside him. A barrier. A defense. Something that held for years. Finally giving way. He doesn't ask where.
He doesn't ask how.
Because he already knows. Instead, he nods.
Once. Slow.
Almost imperceptible. But it's acceptance. And acceptance is the final step. Outside, the process continues. The remains are carefully lifted, preserved, transferred, because even now, respect matters. Precision matters. Every detail still holds weight. The site is documented completely. Measurements taken. Surrounding areas checked for anything else, objects, fibers, tools, anything that might extend the story further. Because even a confession doesn't end an investigation.
It completes it.
News doesn't break immediately. Not publicly.
Not yet.
Because this moment isn't about headlines. It's about confirmation. Family is notified first.
Carefully.
Privately. Because for them, this isn't closure. It's something more complicated. They spent years living with uncertainty, with hope that faded but never fully disappeared, with questions that had no answers.
And now?
They have answers. But those answers come with weight. With finality. With a truth that cannot be undone. Some will say it brings peace. But peace isn't always what follows. Sometimes, it's just the end of waiting. And the beginning of something else. Back in the interrogation room, the tone has changed completely. There's no more need to push. No more need to guide him toward anything. He's already there. The questions now are about detail. Clarification. Completion. You said you panicked, one detective begins. But you drove. You chose a place. You dug. Not accusatory. Just factual. He nods slowly. I didn't think, he says. But the words feel weaker now. Because thinking is exactly what those actions required. And he knows it. I just wanted it gone. There it is. The truth behind everything. Not panic. Not accident. Removal. Erasure. An attempt to make something disappear. But nothing truly disappears. Not like this. Not ever. Did anyone help you? They ask. He shakes his head immediately.
No. No hesitation. No uncertainty.
This part, at least, is clear. He was alone. In the act. In the decision. In the aftermath. And now in the consequence. Hours later, confirmation comes from the lab. Preliminary identification. Consistent with the victim. The case, once defined by absence, is now anchored in reality. And with that, everything shifts. The file is no longer a cold case. It's active. Closed in one sense, but open in another. Because now it moves towards something else. Accountability. The community begins to hear whispers. Not full details.
Not yet.
But enough. Enough to bring the story back. Enough to remind people of what happened here. Years ago. In a place that was supposed to be safe. The same street. The same houses. But now with a different understanding. Because the unknown is gone. Replaced by something clearer. Something heavier. The truth. And truth, even when delayed, changes everything. Back at the station, he sits alone again. No questions now. No pressure.
Just time.
Time to think. Time to feel. Time to understand what has finally caught up to him. Because for years he lived with distance. Distance from the act. Distance from the consequence. Distance from the reality of what he did.
But now.
There is no distance left. Every detail has returned. Every choice has weight. Every moment is real again. And this time, it won't fade. It won't be buried. It won't be forgotten. Because now it belongs to everyone. Investigators. Family. The community. The record. And that means one thing. The silence is over. But what replaces it? Is something far more permanent.
Truth.
Unavoidable. Unforgiving. And finally, complete. The moment the arrest becomes public, the story explodes across California. For years, the disappearance had existed as a question. A mystery whispered about in quiet conversations. A case people remembered but rarely discussed because there was nothing new to say.
No answers. No ending.
Only a name, a photograph, and the haunting image of someone who vanished without explanation. But now, everything has changed. The cold case that refused to die has finally moved. The headline spreads quickly. A 1998 disappearance solved. DNA breakthrough. Arrest shocks investigators. A community that waited decades finally receives the answer it feared. And with that answer comes a flood of emotions that no headline can capture. Relief. Anger. Sadness. Confusion. Because solving a case does not erase what happened. It only reveals it. The neighborhood where she once lived becomes the center of attention again. Reporters return. Cameras appear. Old memories are reopened. People who had almost convinced themselves the past was finished suddenly find themselves standing face to face with it again. The same streets. The same homes. The same places where life continued while someone else's life remained frozen. Residents remember the night she disappeared. They remember the uncertainty, the fear, the feeling that someone among them might know more than they admitted. And now, years later, that suspicion has a name, a person, a face, someone who had been there all along. The investigation moves forward with a new intensity. Detectives who once chased possibilities now work with evidence. The uncertainty that defined the case is gone, replaced by a clear path. But clear does not mean simple. Because proving what happened in a courtroom is different from discovering the truth. A confession matters. DNA matters. But every piece must withstand examination. Every detail must survive challenge. The prosecution begins building its case. Not around one piece of evidence. Around the entire story. The last known moments. The abandoned vehicle. The witness account. The inconsistencies. The forensic findings. The confession. All of it connected. All of it pointing toward the same conclusion. The defense, however, prepares for a different battle. Because decades have passed. Memories fade. Evidence changes. And time creates opportunities for questions. Was the confession reliable? Was the statement influenced? Was every conclusion supported? These are the battles that happen after the truth is discovered. The courtroom becomes the next stage. A place where emotion must step aside and evidence must speak. When the defendant enters the courtroom, the atmosphere changes immediately. The person who had existed in old photographs and investigation files is now standing in front of everyone.
Real.
Present. Accountable. For the victim's family, it is a moment they imagined for years, but never knew if they would see. They spent decades trapped between hope and fear. Hope that answers would come. Fear that they never would. Now they're sitting only a few feet away from the person responsible. And that reality carries its own kind of pain. The opening arguments begin. The prosecution tells the story carefully. Not as a mystery. Not as a theory. But as a chain of decisions. A series of moments where choices were made. They describe the disappearance. The investigation. The years of silence. And the scientific breakthrough that finally reopened the door. The DNA evidence becomes the center of attention. Because it represents something powerful. Time changed everything. But it did not erase the truth. The evidence survived. Waiting. The defense attempts to create uncertainty. They question details. They examine procedures. They remind the courtroom that suspicion is not enough. That every conclusion must meet a legal standard. But the prosecution returns to the same point. This is not based on one detail. It is based on everything together. A pattern. A timeline. A confession supported by evidence. A story that remained hidden until science caught up. Witnesses take the stand. Some are people who knew the victim. People who remember her as more than a case file. They describe her personality, her kindness, her routines, the ordinary life that was interrupted. Because behind every investigation is a person, not a headline. not a statistic. A person. And that is what the courtroom must remember. The forensic experts follow. They explain the DNA, the process, the comparison, the significance. How something invisible became the key that unlocked a decades-old mystery. For many watching, it is almost impossible to understand. A tiny trace. A microscopic piece of evidence. Something overlooked years ago. And yet, that small detail becomes powerful enough to change everything. It becomes the bridge between past and present. The thing that connects a moment from 1998 to the courtroom decades later. The defendant listens. Sometimes looking forward. Sometimes looking down. The confidence seen during earlier interviews is gone. Replaced by something quieter. Something heavier. Because now, the consequences are no longer theoretical. They are happening. The victim's family eventually speaks. And their words carry more weight than any evidence presentation. They speak about years lost. Birthdays without answers. Holidays filled with questions. The pain of not knowing. Because the disappearance created a wound that never fully closed. The truth brought an ending. But endings can hurt. The courtroom listens. Even the people who have followed the case from the beginning understand that this moment is bigger than a conviction. It is about recognition. Recognition of what happened. Recognition of who was lost. Recognition that someone's life mattered. The trial continues. Days become weeks. Arguments become sharper. The details become clearer. And slowly, the picture becomes complete. The jury receives the case. A decision that carries enormous weight. They review the evidence, the testimony, the timeline, the confession, the science. Everything. Then they leave to deliberate. The waiting begins. A different kind of silence. Not the silence of an unsolved disappearance. Not the silence of unanswered questions. But the silence before judgment. The community waits. The family waits. Everyone waits. And when the jury finally returns, the courtroom becomes completely still. The defendant stands. The judge looks forward. The verdict is read.
Guilty.
One word. But it carries decades of pain. Decades of uncertainty. Decades of waiting. The case that began with a missing person. The case that survived years of silence. The case that seemed destined to remain unanswered. Finally reaches its conclusion. But outside the courtroom, the story continues. Because solving a cold case does not erase the years that were lost. It does not bring back the moments that should have happened. It does not undo the pain. What it does is restore something that was taken.
Truth.
The community no longer has to wonder. The family no longer has to search. The file that once represented uncertainty now represents justice. And somewhere in the records of California history, this case joins the list of mysteries that were finally solved. Not because time gave up. Not because people forgot. But because someone kept looking. Because evidence waited. Because science advanced. And because even after decades, the truth refused to stay buried. The verdict ends the courtroom battle, but it does not end the story. Because some cases are not measured by the moment the judge speaks. They are measured by everything that came after. The empty years. The unanswered questions. The families who waited. The investigators who refused to forget. For this community, the conclusion of the case is not a celebration. It is something far more complicated. It is the end of uncertainty. And uncertainty can be its own kind of prison. For decades, people lived with a question that had no answer. What happened? Where did she go? Would anyone ever know? Those questions followed them through years of ordinary life, through changing neighborhoods, through new generations growing up without understanding why one name still carried so much sadness. Now, finally, there is an answer. But answers do not always bring peace immediately. Sometimes, they bring a different kind of silence. The silence after the truth arrives. The victim's family faces a reality they spent years preparing for, but never truly imagined. The hope that she might somehow return is gone forever. That hope had survived longer than anyone expected. Even when evidence suggested the worst. Even when years passed. Even when the world moved forward. A small part of them continued waiting. Now, there is no more waiting. Only remembering. They remember the person she was before she became a case file. Before her name appeared in reports. Before investigators searched roads and forests. Before headlines reduced a life into a mystery. She was a daughter. A friend. A person with plans, dreams, and ordinary moments that mattered. And that is something the investigation never forgets. Because behind every cold case is a human story. Not just evidence. Not just timelines. Not just photographs. A life. The detectives who worked the case also reflect on the journey. Many of them admit they never expected to see the ending. Cold cases are built on patience. They test investigators in ways active cases rarely do. The urgency fades. Resources move elsewhere. Years create distance. But the question remains. And sometimes, that question refuses to disappear. For the original investigators, the case becomes a reminder that unfinished does not mean forgotten. A file sitting quietly in storage is not a dead file. Not if someone is willing to open it again. The breakthrough that changed everything did not come from one person. It came from time. From technology. From persistence. The evidence that once seemed silent was never truly silent. It was waiting for the right moment. That is the strange power of forensic science. A tiny piece of information can survive longer than memories. Longer than rumors. Longer than false explanations. Years can pass. People can move. Stories can change. But evidence remains. And eventually it can speak. The case becomes an example studied by investigators and forensic experts. Not because it was unusual only for its tragedy, but because it demonstrated something important. Cold cases can change. A case that seems impossible today may not be impossible tomorrow. New technology can reopen old questions. New methods can reveal what earlier generations could not see. The past can be revisited.
Not changed.
But understood. Across the community, reactions remain mixed. Some people feel relief. Others feel anger. Some struggle with the fact that the person responsible lived freely for so many years. They ask the questions that naturally follow.
How?
How did someone connected to such a tragedy continue living a normal life? How did the world keep moving while a secret remained hidden? Those questions have no easy answers. Because human behavior is complicated. And sometimes the most disturbing part of a crime is not only what happened, but how long someone was able to live afterward pretending it didn't. The location where she was found also changes. A place that once meant nothing becomes permanently connected to the case. For investigators, it represents the final step in a long search. For the family, it represents something painful. For the public, it becomes a symbol. A reminder that even forgotten places can hold forgotten stories. Years after the discovery, people still talk about the case. Not with the same fear as before, but with a different kind of respect. Because everyone understands now that the mystery was never impossible. It was simply waiting for the right moment. The case also changes how people view DNA technology. For many, DNA becomes more than a scientific term. It becomes the reason a family finally received answers. The reason investigators returned to an old file. The reason a person who believed time had protected him was finally confronted. The science does not replace traditional investigation. It completes it. The interviews. The searches. The reports. The instincts of detectives who notice details others overlooked. Everything matters. Every piece contributes. A cold case is rarely solved by one miracle. It is solved by thousands of small efforts refusing to disappear. Years after the trial, the original questions become historical records. The missing person report. The investigation notes. The evidence. The courtroom testimony. All preserved. All telling the same story. A story about loss. About determination. About the fact that silence has an expiration date. Because no matter how much time passes, truth has a way of returning. Maybe not quickly. Maybe not easily. But eventually. The case also leaves behind a message for future investigators. Never assume an old case is finished. Never assume a forgotten piece of evidence has no value. Never assume time has won. Because time can work in two directions. It can create distance. But it can also reveal. The same years that allowed someone to believe they were safe also allowed technology to become powerful enough to uncover what had been hidden. The clock did not protect the truth. It preserved it. And that is what makes cold cases so haunting.
They are not just stories from the past.
They're stories still waiting for their final chapter. This case began with a simple question. Where did she go? A question that haunted a family. A community. A group of investigators who refused to stop searching. For years, the answer remained hidden. Then one day, a small piece of evidence changed everything. A DNA breakthrough. A reopened investigation. A truth that finally emerged. The disappearance that once represented uncertainty became a reminder of something much larger. That every victim deserves to be found. Every family deserves answers. Every unanswered case deserves another look. Because behind every cold case is someone waiting. Someone whose story has not finished. Someone whose name deserves to be spoken. And in California, after decades of silence, one name was finally returned to the place it belonged. Not in a missing person file. Not in an unsolved investigation. But in memory. The mystery ended. The question stopped. The truth remained. And after all those years, the silence finally broke. Years after the final verdict, the case continues to exist in a different form. Not as an active investigation. Not as a mystery waiting to be solved. But as a reminder. A reminder of how close the truth can come to disappearing. A reminder that justice does not always arrive quickly. And a reminder that some stories refuse to end until every question has been answered. The file that once represented frustration now represents something else. Persistence. Inside the archives, the documents remain. The original reports. The photographs. The witness statements. The evidence logs. Thousands of pages that once represented uncertainty now tell a complete story. But for investigators who lived through the case, the memory is not stored in paper. It is stored in moments. The first call, the abandoned car, the empty house, the endless searches, the years where every possible lead seemed to collapse. And then, the moment when science reopened a door that everyone thought had closed forever. That is what makes cold cases different. They're not just investigations. They're battles against time. Every year that passes creates another obstacle. People forget. Places change. Records disappear. Witnesses move away. Memories become less reliable. But sometimes, hidden beneath all that change, something remains untouched. Evidence. Waiting. The investigators who worked this case often described the breakthrough as unexpected. Not impossible, but unexpected. Because after so many years, expectations become complicated. You hope for answers, but you prepare for disappointment. That is the emotional reality of cold case work. Every new review carries the possibility of failure. Another dead end. Another unanswered question. Another reminder that some families may never know what happened. But this time was different. This time the evidence created movement. The kind of movement that transforms a forgotten file into the center of attention again. And once the case reopened, the past started connecting itself. Old interviews gained new meaning. Old decisions were examined again. Old assumptions were challenged. Because time changes one important thing. Perspective. A detail ignored decades earlier can become significant later. A statement that seemed harmless can reveal a pattern. A piece of evidence that once appeared meaningless can become the key. That is the unpredictable nature of investigations. The truth does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits quietly until someone knows how to recognize it. For the public, the case becomes another example of why unsolved disappearances remain so powerful. They stay alive because people imagine the unanswered possibilities. A missing person creates a unique kind of pain. There is no clear ending.
No certainty.
Only questions. Families are forced to live between two worlds. One where they hope. One where they fear. And that space between hope and reality can last for years. Sometimes decades. The resolution of this case changed that. It replaced uncertainty with knowledge. Painful knowledge. But knowledge. And that difference matters. Because not knowing can become its own form of suffering. The community also reflects on the years before the breakthrough. People remember how quickly a neighborhood can change after something shocking happens. A place that once felt ordinary suddenly becomes associated with fear. Every street looks different. Every unfamiliar face seems suspicious. Every unanswered question creates another possibility. But over time, life returns. Children grow up. Families move in. Businesses change. The world continues. And yet, beneath the surface, the memory remains. That is what happened here. The community moved forward. But it never completely moved on. Because someone was still missing. Someone was still waiting to come home. The final resolution also brings attention to the role of victims in criminal investigations. Because for years, the focus of a cold case often becomes the mystery itself. The clues. The suspect. The investigation. But the center of the story is always the person who was lost. The victim's identity must exist beyond the tragedy. Beyond the headlines. Beyond the courtroom. She was not just the woman from the case. She was a person who lived before the investigation began. Someone with relationships, memories, dreams. A future that should have continued. That understanding becomes part of the lasting legacy of the case. Not only that it was solved, but that the person at the center was remembered. For future investigators, the case becomes a lesson in patience. Technology will continue changing. Methods will continue improving. But one principle remains constant. Never stop asking questions. Because sometimes the answer is hidden in places everyone has already looked. Sometimes the difference between an unsolved case and a solved one is not a new clue. It is a new way of seeing an old one. The DNA breakthrough becomes the symbol of that idea. A scientific advancement that transformed the impossible into the possible. But science alone was not enough. The evidence had to be collected, preserved, documented, protected. Years earlier, someone made the decision to carefully store what they had. They did not know when it would matter. They did not know if it ever would. But they preserved the possibility. And that possibility eventually became justice. The case also changes the way many people think about time. For the suspect, time may have felt like protection. Years passed. The world changed. The investigation slowed. The memory faded. But time was not protection. It was a countdown. Every year brought new technology. Every year created new opportunities. Every year increased the possibility that the truth would return. And eventually it did. That is the haunting reality behind many cold cases. The person responsible may believe they escaped. But escape and delay are not the same thing. A secret can survive for years, but it cannot survive forever. The final chapters of the case are not about the mystery anymore. They are about what remains. A family that can finally grieve. Investigators who can finally close a file. A community that can finally stop wondering. And a victim whose story is no longer defined by disappearance. It is defined by remembrance. The case began with silence. A silent car. A silent house. A silent investigation. For years, that silence seemed permanent. But silence is fragile. One piece of evidence can break it. One discovery can change everything. One moment can connect the past and the present. And when that happens, decades of unanswered questions can collapse in a single day. That is why cold cases continue to capture attention. Because they represent something deeply human. The belief that no matter how much time passes, the truth still matters. The belief that someone missing is never forgotten. The belief that justice can arrive late, but still arrive. And in this California case, after years of uncertainty, the final answer came from the smallest trace. A microscopic piece of evidence. A silent witness that waited patiently. Waiting for science. Waiting for investigators. Waiting for the moment when it could finally speak. And when it did, it changed everything. The story of the California 1998 cold case does not end when the courtroom empties. It does not end when the verdict is announced. It does not end when the cameras disappear and the headlines move on to something else. Because some cases leave behind a shadow. A reminder. A question that continues long after the official investigation is complete. How did this happen? How did someone vanish in a quiet community? How did years pass without answers? And how did one small piece of evidence finally bring the truth back into the light? Those questions remain because the case represents something larger than one crime. It represents the fear of the unknown, the pain of waiting, and the determination of people who refuse to let a forgotten name disappear. For the investigators involved, the conclusion is both an ending and a beginning. An ending because the mystery is finally solved. A beginning because the lessons from the case continue. Every cold case changes the people who work on it. Detectives carry these investigations differently. They remember the faces, the families, the unanswered questions. They remember the moments when they had nothing but instincts and hope. And they remember the frustration of knowing someone was missing while the evidence remained silent. But they also remember something else. The moment when silence breaks. The moment when a case that seemed frozen suddenly moves again. That moment becomes proof that patience matters. That persistence matters. That every report, every photograph, every collected piece of evidence has value. Even decades later, the world often sees solved cases as simple endings. A suspect identified. An arrest made. A conviction secured. But behind that final result are years of work that most people never see. The late nights. The reviews. The disagreements. The decisions to look again. The willingness to question what was already believed. Because solving a cold case requires something rare. The ability to believe that the answer still exists, even when there is no sign of it. That belief kept this investigation alive. The DNA breakthrough became the turning point, but it was not the only reason the case was solved. It was the combination of old-fashioned detective work and modern technology. The original investigation created the foundation. The new technology opened the door. Together, they created the path to the truth. This became one of the most important lessons from the case. Evidence does not become meaningless because time passes. Sometimes, time gives evidence more power. Technology changes. Scientific methods improve. Tools become more precise. And suddenly, something once considered impossible becomes possible. A trace that could not speak in 1998 can tell the entire story years later. That reality has changed how law enforcement agencies approach older investigations. Files that once sat untouched are reviewed again. Evidence once considered limited is examined under new standards. Because every cold case contains a possibility. A possibility that the answer is already there. Waiting. The case also leaves a lasting impact on the community. For years, the disappearance represented fear. People wondered if the person responsible was still nearby. They wondered if the truth would ever emerge. They wondered if the case would become another unsolved mystery lost to time. Now, those questions have answers. But the memory remains. The neighborhood remembers what it felt like when someone disappeared. The uncertainty. The rumors. The fear. The feeling that normal life had been interrupted by something impossible to understand. And although years have passed, the emotional impact remains connected to the place. Because locations hold memories. A street. A house. A road surrounded by trees. Ordinary places can become permanently connected to extraordinary events. That is one of the most unsettling parts of crime stories. The places where they happen often look completely normal afterward. The world continues. People walk by. Cars drive past. Life returns. But the history remains. The case also changes the way people think about victims of long unsolved crimes. For years, the victim's name was associated with one terrible moment. A disappearance. A mystery. A search. But the final chapter restores something important. Identity. The victim becomes more than a case number. More than a headline. More than an unanswered question. She becomes remembered for who she was. The person she was before the investigation. The person whose life mattered long before the world learned her name. That is one of the most important responsibilities in telling stories like this. Remembering that every cold case begins with a human being. Someone loved. Someone missed. Someone whose absence changed lives. The resolution brings justice, but justice takes many forms. For the legal system, justice means accountability. For investigators, justice means completing the work. For families, justice means finally knowing. And for the victim, justice means being remembered. The case also becomes a warning, not only to those who commit crimes, but to anyone who believes time erases consequences. Years can pass. Evidence can become old. Memories can fade. But truth has a way of surviving. Sometimes hidden. Sometimes delayed. But surviving. The person responsible in this case may have believed the passage of time created distance. That the years between 1998 and the eventual breakthrough created safety. But time did not erase the evidence. It preserved the possibility of discovery. Every year brought new tools. Every year brought new techniques. Every year brought investigators closer. Until finally the past returned. And when it returned completely. That is what makes this case unforgettable. Not only that it was solved, but how it was solved. A case built on absence was eventually solved by something invisible. A tiny biological trace. Something too small to notice. Something that waited patiently while the world moved forward. The breakthrough was not dramatic when it first existed. It was quiet. Scientific. Almost ordinary. But its impact was enormous. Because sometimes the smallest things create the biggest changes. A single piece of DNA. A single connection. A single answer. Enough to transform a mystery into history. Years later, when people look back on the case, they will remember the beginning. The disappearance. The confusion. The years of silence. But they will also remember the ending. The moment when a cold case was no longer cold. The moment when investigators finally had the evidence they needed. The moment when a family finally received answers. The moment when the truth returned. Because that is the message left behind. Cases may become cold, but they are never truly forgotten. Not by families. Not by investigators. Not by communities. And not by the evidence itself. Somewhere inside every unanswered case is a story waiting to be completed. A final piece waiting to be found. A voice waiting to be heard. And when that voice finally speaks, the world listens. The final chapter of the California 1998 cold case is not defined by the moment of arrest. It is not defined by the courtroom. It is not even defined by the DNA breakthrough that changed everything. Because the true ending of a case like this is not about the person responsible. It is about what remains after the truth finally arrives. For decades, this case existed as a wound that never closed. A missing person report that stayed active. A photograph that remained on investigators' desks. A name that continued to appear in conversations filled with uncertainty. Years passed, but the question remained. Where was she? What happened that night? Would anyone ever know? Those questions followed people for years. They followed the family. They followed the investigators. They followed a community that had learned to live with something unfinished. But unfinished does not mean forgotten. That is the lesson this case leaves behind. Because even when the world moves forward, some stories remain. They wait. They wait in old files. They wait in evidence rooms. They wait in the memories of people who refuse to let them disappear. And sometimes, after years of silence, they speak. The final resolution of this case was not a sudden miracle. It was the result of thousands of small decisions. A detective choosing to preserve evidence. A technician carefully processing a sample. An investigator deciding to review an old file one more time. A family continuing to ask for answers. Every action mattered. Every detail mattered. Because cold cases are not solved by time alone. They are solved because someone continues to believe that the truth is still there. The world often imagines justice as a dramatic moment. A confession. An arrest. A courtroom verdict. But the reality is different. Justice is often slow. Quiet. Patient. It arrives through years of work that most people never see. It arrives through evidence that waits longer than anyone expected. It arrives when technology finally catches up with the questions of the past. That is exactly what happened here. In 1998, investigators had questions. They had theories. They had possibilities. But they did not have enough. The evidence existed. But the tools were limited. The answers were there. But they were hidden. Then, decades later, science changed the conversation. DNA transformed what was once uncertain into something clear. A connection. A match. A path forward. The breakthrough did not erase the years that were lost. Nothing could do that. It did not bring back the moments that should have happened. It did not remove the pain. But it did something important. It ended the waiting. And sometimes, ending the waiting is the first step toward healing. For the victim's family, the years before the discovery were filled with a unique kind of suffering. A disappearance creates an endless question. A person is gone, but the story is unfinished. There is no final goodbye.
No certainty.
No place to put the grief. The family lives between hope and reality. Between wanting answers and fearing them. The discovery changed that. It brought a painful truth. But it also brought something that had been missing for years. A place. An explanation. A final chapter. And with that final chapter came the ability to remember her differently. Not only as the person who disappeared, but as the person she was before. A daughter. A friend. A human being with a life that mattered. That is what every solved cold case should restore. Not just justice. Memory. Because the danger of unsolved cases is that victims can slowly become defined by the mystery surrounding them. Their lives become reduced to questions. Their names become connected only to tragedy.
But the ending of this case changes that.
The mystery is no longer the center. The person is. The community also carries the memory of what happened. For years, people lived with uncertainty. They looked at familiar streets differently. They wondered if the truth would ever come. They wondered if the person responsible was still nearby. Now they know. The fear has a name. The mystery has an answer. The silence has been replaced by truth. But the memory remains. Because communities remember. They remember the moments when normal life was interrupted. They remember the shock. They remember the fear. And they remember the relief when the case was finally solved. The story also becomes a message for future generations. A reminder that technology continues to change the way justice is found. Evidence that seems insignificant today may become the key tomorrow. A case that appears impossible may only be waiting for the right tool. The future can reveal the past. That idea is what makes cold cases so powerful. They are stories about patience, about hope, about the relationship between time and truth. Time can hide things, but time can also reveal them. The same years that created distance also created opportunity. The same years that allowed memories to fade also allowed science to advance. And eventually the balance shifted. The evidence spoke louder than the silence. The final records of the case now tell a complete story. A disappearance. An investigation. A breakthrough. A conviction. But beyond the official record is another story. The story of people who refuse to give up. The investigators who returned to the evidence. The scientists who uncovered what was hidden. The family who continued waiting. The community that continued remembering. That is the true legacy of this case. Not simply that it was solved, but that it proved something important. No case is truly finished while questions remain. No victim is truly forgotten while someone continues searching. No evidence is meaningless simply because time has passed. Because the truth does not expire. It waits. Sometimes for years. Sometimes for decades. But it waits. The California 1998 cold case began with a moment of confusion. A missing person. An abandoned vehicle. A silent house. A community searching for answers. It became a case defined by uncertainty. A story that seemed trapped in the past. But the past was never completely closed. The evidence remained. The questions remained. The possibility remained. And eventually, the truth returned. Not with a warning. Not with a dramatic announcement. But through something almost invisible. A trace. A connection. A scientific discovery that changed everything. And when that small piece of evidence finally spoke, it carried the weight of decades. It carried the questions of a family. The determination of investigators. The memory of a community. And the voice of someone who could no longer speak for herself. That is why this case will be remembered. Not because it was only a crime, but because it was a reminder. A reminder that every person matters. Every unanswered question matters. Every piece of evidence matters. And every cold case has a story waiting to be told. The world may move on. Files may collect dust. Years may pass. But truth has patience. And in California, after decades of silence, the truth finally arrived. The mystery ended. The questions were answered. The case was solved. But the memory remains forever.